Good afternoon, and welcome to Straight Talking with Kelly, where real conversations happen. This is where you will meet some of the most talented, intelligent, and creative people who come to share tips, resources, and knowledge on various topics. The guests come from various industries that include education, music, television, theater, fashion, culinary arts, hospitality, health and wellness, mental health, community advocates, and so much more. Join me today in welcoming my guest, Professor Jones. He's a hospitality management educator who's going to talk about the importance of a global perspective on diversity and inclusion. Welcome, Professor Jones.
Thank you, Kelly. It's great to be here.
Oh, I am so excited. This is going to be such a fun interview because we have such a rich history together. So before we dive into our conversation about diversity and inclusion in the hospitality industry, let me provide you with some brief background about Professor Jones. He has more than 45 years of hospitality industry experience. He recently retired from a full-time teaching position at California Polytechnic University in San Luis Obispo. His past academic background also includes holding the position of professor and programming director at Singapore Institute of Technology, professor and chair of the Department of Hospitality Management at the University of San Francisco. Oh my goodness. And then he has an associate professor and undergraduate programming director at Hong Kong Polytechnic University School of Hotel and Tourism Management, associate professor in the Department of Hospitality Management at San Francisco State, and assistant professor at the William F. Harrah College of Hotel Administration at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Trust me, this isn't even all of it. So as we get into the conversation, I'm going to have him go back and explain a little bit more about this illustrious career because I'm telling you, I didn't even touch the surface. Am I right or wrong?
Yes, you're right.
So this is exciting. But before we get into that, I want to actually walk down memory lane and give you a little bit of my history with him. Now, I met Dr. Jones when I was actually an advisory board member at San Francisco State University at the Hospitality Management Program. And I've been on that board for I want to say 18 years or probably a little bit longer than that. But one particular afternoon, when I walked into the meeting, I was the first one there. Dr. Jones was there, and he goes, "Kelly, can I talk to you?" And I go, "Okay." He says, "We need to get more diversity into this program." And so I'm looking at him and I'm like, "Yeah, I agree with that because, I've been on that board for I don't know how long, and I didn't see a lot of African American kids going through that program or Latin kids." And so I said to him, I said, "Well, what do you think I can do?" He says, "I don't know. I've actually gone up to Washington High School." He named a couple of other high schools that he had visited, looking for diversity to get kids interested in the program. And he came back, he says, and there were none. He says, "So this is why I'm coming to you, because I think you can help me." And so at that time, I said, "Well, you know what? I was working over at City College. I teach at City College, but I was working with Dr. Honeycutt over at the Southeast campus over in the Bayview." And I said, "Let me introduce you to her." Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So I introduced those two together, and Dr. Honeycutt gets all excited and she says, "Oh, this is fantastic. Let's do this." So the original idea of the culinary program that I started was to be a partnership between San Francisco State University and City College. Well, Dr. Honeycutt says, "Well, the only way I can really get behind this is if Kelly's the instructor." And I'm like, "The instructor? How did I get, do you remember that?" I'm like, "Wait a
Yeah.
minute, that's not why I put you two together. You guys were supposed to figure this out. But now all of a sudden I'm the instructor." And I'm like, "Okay." So long story short, we ended up deciding we were going to do this. And so I created a proposal. I wrote a proposal and I called the program Primed and Prep, a hospitality management, culinary arts, job mentoring and training program. Dr. Jones was phenomenal with this. He started helping me go around to the different hotels, knocking on the doors, all these GMs would open at the Marriott, Intercontinental, that, they wide open arms. And things were going great. And Dr. Jones came to me one day and says, Kelly, you know what? I got to tell you something. And I said, what? He says, I'm getting ready to move to China. And I'm like, you going? What? I said, what? I said, you can't go now. We're getting started with this. So anyways, he ended up going. And the interesting thing after that, those very same people that were opening their arms to me, all of a sudden were no longer opening their arms when I was knocking on those doors after he left. But I was determined that this program was going to happen, because what I realized years later, Dr. Jones, what you did for me, I said, you know what? God used you as a messenger. He was like, you know what? You're not going to do this program, but I'm going to point you to the person that I know that will get it done. So you were that's how I see you, as the messenger that says, you know what, Kelly, this is in your hands now. Make it happen. And so,
Thank you. That's quite an honor.
well, no, it's true. And so when it took me 8 years before, people would listen to me, but I kept knocking on doors. I kept knocking on doors. And eventually, of course, it ended up happening. And so, but I always look at you as a person that planted the seed for that. And that's why when I had that very last Iron Chef program, remember, it was
Yes.
at
Yes.
in the Vista Room at San Francisco State,
Right.
where the program was birthed. I'm like, you know what? How can you have a full circle moment like that? So I know that when we decided to have it at the Vista Room, Casey was like, Kelly, can you believe we're back here? And I'm like, okay, now you remember Casey, right?
Sure.
Because Casey was my advisory board chair for the Permanent Prep program. Interestingly enough, I said, you know what? We got to get Dr. Jones here. I said, I have to honor him, because if it wasn't for him, I would have never done a Permanent Prep program, would have never thought crossed my mind. And so
Well,
to
I
be,
think you made it happen. You made it happen. It was a convergence of two great ideas between you and I, and how to put it together, and you made it happen. And I'm so proud of you for that. I mean, that's a major accomplishment. It makes me very, very pleased to have been part of that.
oh, absolutely. Well, that's why you got that Flame of Inspiration award,
Yeah.
because like I said, I was like, it made me feel good that I was able to actually acknowledge the fact that you did that, because I have acknowledged my advisory board 100 times. I could not have done this without Casey. I always call it the Casey and Kelly show, because it really was the Casey and Kelly show. Casey and I would sit down and we'd plan it out and we would make things happen. So, anyways, I am just so glad that you're here and that I'm able to publicly acknowledge you for the work that you've done to make sure that African American kids were able to be seen in the industry. And then I also have Rashida to thank, Rashida Nairobi, because she was my mentor helping me through this whole process. I had no clue what I was doing at first. And, she would kind of guide me and help me. And then she put me in touch with Local 2, and I worked with Mike Casey. And I really got to see the real problem that was going on in the industry, actually not embracing Black people. I'm talking about specifically Black folks. And I'm thinking, oh no. And I think that's what made me fight even harder, because when I would ask them, I said, how come you guys don't have Black people working in the hotel industry? Well, we can't find dependable workers. And I'm like, a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to get you some.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so to be able to get young Black men and young Black girls in that industry was phenomenal. And then by year 4 of the program, it branched out where Latino kids start coming. I even had Asian kids coming. So it became a real potpourri of everybody. But my specific focus was really for Black young men and young girls. And it wasn't
Mhm.
even for young girls, it was for Black men, because they were the ones having a hard time getting jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now
Yes.
I got, like I told you earlier before we came on the show, I have 3 young of the men that were in the program that I'll be interviewing one of them was 13 when he started in the program. He's
Wow.
21
Wow.
now,
Wow.
started his own catering business, and now, doing his thing. And the other one is
Right.
still working at the Fairmont, part of the union, the whole night, so I'm just
Outstanding.
like, being able
Outstanding.
to change lives like this has been, so you were a part of that. Because of your interest in making sure there were Black kids in that program, because I'm going to tell you something, Dr. Jones, and that's what I called you. I didn't call you Professor Jones. I called you Dr. Jones. So you see,
That's
that's what
a,
I'm going to call
that's
you
a,
throughout the rest
you,
of this
you can
thing.
call me whatever you like.
You know what the beauty of that conversation with us was, is that no one else on that advisory board or in that hospitality, program was concerned about that but you. And so when they found out that I was actually getting ready to make this happen, Janet Sims, who was a department chair at that time, she really got behind me 100%. Janet was phenomenal. She
Yeah.
was like, whatever San Francisco State can do, let us know. It was City College that had the problem,
Hmm.
because they had just
Hmm.
lost their department chair and they were bringing in a new one with Tanis Wright. Tanis Wright was coming the new chair. And it was just too much for her to even think about trying to partner with the program. But years later, Tanis and I ended up doing some phenomenal partnership together after
Oh,
she
that's
had
great.
gotten
That's great.
acclimated as so it worked out beautiful. So I still had a relationship with City College and San Francisco State. We would do field trips. We did the field
Yeah.
trips with you when you were over at
Yeah.
USF.
Yeah.
So you
Yes.
did well.
Yes.
So now that we've walked down memory lane and got the audience to understand our relationship and the importance of this interview, I'd like for you to give us a little bit about your background, about like where you were born and raised, and then how you got into the hospitality industry. And because you had so many different positions as professors, which one stood out the most to you? I know that
Wow.
was a mouthful.
Yeah. Well, my career is mixed between the industry and academics, but I'm originally from Michigan. I was born in Detroit, and I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit,
Okay.
and I went to Michigan State, which has a well-renowned hospitality management program. But as an undergraduate, that's not what I was in. I was in trying to stay in school with the minimum grade point. That was sort of my approach as an undergraduate, find a way to get out and graduate. But it was in labor relations is actually what I ended up in, which ironically I ended up teaching in the academic world later on.
Okay.
But I started my career, my professional career out of college in the insurance industry, and the hospitality industry came later when I decided to, based circumstances that happened at the time, I decided to go back and get an MBA at Michigan State in hospitality management. Now, my initial thought was I wanted to go into the travel industry. It didn't take me very long to realize that that wasn't really the path that I wanted to follow, that the hospitality marketing side in particular was where my focus was. And that ended up eventually taking me, well, I worked for convention visitors bureaus for a couple of years, and then I ended up in the hotel industry with Marriott in Chicago, opening the, just after the opening of the Chicago Marriott Hotel, which is one of their first major convention hotels. And that's where I sort of built my niche, was in the convention type hotels, the big boxes as they're called. And that eventually got me promoted to a regional position, selling all Marriott hotels in Chicago, and then to Orlando, and opened the Marriott World Center in Orlando as the opening director of marketing. And I was actually the first employee of that hotel,
Wow.
which is a 1,500 room resort hotel. And that was a real growth experience. And then I left Marriott for a very unique opportunity to come to California, and I opened the Red Lion, which is now a Hilton in Santa Barbara, and that's when I fell in love with California, and that sort of has become my home ever since then, even though I have ventured away. But over the years, I worked in the hotel industry, then I worked in the convention and visitors bureau area, and then eventually that led me to feeling that I was doing a lot of training necessarily with my own teams and so on, but I wanted to go further with that. And that ended up taking me back to get a PhD in hospitality and tourism management at Virginia Tech. And that started my academic career. And I
Wow.
began at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. That was my first full-time position.
What a mouthful. I
Yeah,
mean,
well, and
that's
that's
a,
only giving you parts of it because I ended up in the industry again for another year or so in San Jose at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, but then I missed the academic world and went back.
okay. So now, like, how long were you at San Francisco State?
I was at San Francisco State for 5 years.
Okay. And
That
then
was my
after,
first full-time academic job. That was my first full-time
okay, okay, okay.
as a professor. I taught while I was in grad school. I shouldn't say that. That's not true. UNLV was my first. That was my second position. Sorry. See, I lose track. You think all those things you were telling me. I forgot what I did too.
Well, you know what the beauty, when I think back to this time, I think about all the wonderful students, and I'm actually in touch with some of them still. I'm on Facebook with them or LinkedIn, like with Candace Lamb. I'm on Facebook with her, and I get to see what she's doing over there. Then Pedram in Vegas, and sometimes when I go to Vegas, I make sure to see him, so we stay connected.
Those are two
And
stars
then
from the past. Yeah,
Franco, just
definitely.
all of these guys, I remember, helping them do what they're doing now. So it's beautiful. So I'm sure you have wonderful stories of students whose careers you've helped launch.
Well, they've done, some of them have done extremely well in the industry. Pedram being one, and in particular, he's done exceptionally well in Vegas.
Oh yeah,
And
he's Mr. Big Shot.
he credits me with introducing him to the guy who hired him there, who started his career in Las Vegas. And I did actually. He wanted to move to Vegas, and I knew somebody because I'd just come from UNLV, and so I introduced him, and he built it from there and became a great
Oh
success.
yeah, Pedram is amazing. I remember when I first got there, when he wasn't working for the Win at that time, but that's when he told me, I think they were building it, and he was like, I'm gonna work there.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
now he's like a vice president or something over
yeah,
there. And I'm just like,
exactly.
go ahead on, Pedram. It's wonderful. Now, I know that, like I said, after you decided to move to China, tell me about that experience and what led you there.
Well, one thing I left out of my industry career was I actually, after opening the hotel in Santa Barbara, I went to work for an Asian hotel company, Shangri-La Hotels, which was headquartered in Hong Kong. And I spent 3 years running their operations in their sales and marketing operations in the US and Canada. And then I went to Hong Kong as the first group director of sales for the company back then, or vice president of sales, we call it. And after that experience, I really fell in love with Asia. And then when I got into the academic field, I spent a lot of time and I did a lot of my research in the initial stages in academic with the differences I had seen between Asia and North America. And that eventually prompted someone who I had known in the US who had moved to Hong Kong to take over the position as the dean, now the dean of the hospitality school at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And he recruited me there from San Francisco State. So that took me back to Hong Kong in the academic aspect of it. So I've actually been back and forth to Asia 3 times in my career, twice to Hong Kong and once to Singapore.
Okay, so now tell me this. How has your international experience influenced your views on diversity and inclusion in the hospitality industry?
Well, one of the things that I found interesting is that the issue of diversity and inclusion is a universal global issue. It is not just an American issue, but the
Okay.
factors are somewhat different in cases. For example, in Hong Kong, some of that diversity aspect has to do with Hong Kong Chinese versus mainland Chinese, because there is, a difference there in terms of where they grew up and the systems they came in and so on, and being able to be diverse, even though they may look alike. They have different languages, essentially different dialects that they speak, and that is a factor. But it was the other part of Hong Kong from an international perspective, those coming from outside, the expats, if you will, or the students from overseas, is it's a very diverse group of people. They come
Huh.
from all over North America, Africa, Europe, and so there isn't any stigma about where they're from when they come into those programs. They're
Okay.
accepted as what they came to study and how they came to study it.
Okay.
But the real eye opener for me that I think has continued to influence some of my feelings about what we do or don't do in North America came in Singapore. Singapore is an incredible country in the way it was formed just a little over 50 years ago, and that it brings together three different nationalities, Chinese, Malay, and Indian, and it brings together four different religions. And what they did in the really intelligent and smart way that it was launched, that Singapore was launched as a country when it broke away from Malaysia, was that they tried to create things as equal as possible between the various entities, whether it was the religious or the nationality. Well, I shouldn't say the nationality, the cultural background in terms of race, if you will.
Okay.
And so they developed things like, for example, every religion has a holiday. So there's holidays for the Buddhist religion. There's holidays for the Tamil religion, the Indian religion, which is the primary one from there. The Christian religion and the Buddhist. And each one has its own holidays that it celebrates there. And from a racial standpoint, the ability to interact with each other. Now, each of the racial aspects do concentrate and learn their own cultural language, although English is the spoken language amongst them. And I saw this amongst the students. There was very little discrimination. Now, certain fields like hospitality don't necessarily attract people from the different races, as the case in the US in some respects, but it's handled differently. It's not so much that they're discriminated against, it's more that they choose to go to different fields. They're not as involved in, let's say, the external, or extroverted type personalities necessarily that you might find in hospitality. But in other cases, for example, in the program I was in, it's still 85% Chinese in Singapore, but we had a very high percentage of Malays, and that's not true in like the engineering fields there. So we were, and whenever the students interact with each other and so on, there was always a commonality. Now, some of them knew the other's languages, but they were always communicating within a common language. And so what I saw is as a respect, and it was ingrained in the culture of how Singapore was formed. And not that there aren't racial issues in Singapore, there are, as there are anywhere, sometimes with regards to economics and so on. But the way it's handled there, even how housing is done there and so on, it's always integrated. It's a very integrated country. And so I really respected that a lot. And it got me thinking about things like in our own culture here, why we don't necessarily recognize other religions. For example, my youngest daughter is Jewish, and we don't celebrate and take days off on a regular basis for Jewish holidays in the United States. Everything is based on the Christian religion, the Christian calendar. And what do we do about recognizing? Now we are in Black History Month, and so that's a new and a more recent thing that we're actually recognizing today, and that's a good thing. But I think we need more of that. We need more of that kind of thing.
Well, you know what, for me, February being Black History Month, I'm like, you know what, every day is Black History Month,
well,
especially yes, with all the things that have happened to the Black culture. We still have a lot of reckoning to do in this country towards what has happened to us. So every day to me is Black history. And what I like right now is that having the internet, I mean, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, really, but being able to share all of the different knowledge, and we're finding out stuff that we didn't even know we were a part of, and the things that we have created and the things that were stolen from us. So we keep finding out stuff. So every day, so Black History Month, okay, but you know what, realistically, every day, because we built this country. We built this country, and that needs to be acknowledged. Anyways, now back to what you were talking about with all of the different celebrations of the holidays. I'm like, well, when do these people go to work? If they got
well, I mean, for example, in Hong Kong, in the Chinese aspect, you have the Chinese New Year, right? So Chinese New Year in Hong Kong is a whole week off for students. Chinese New Year in Singapore is just 2 days.
Okay.
So, but there is a holiday for the Indian holiday, the Diwali, and there's also for the Buddhist holidays, and so there's all of that is incorporated, and each gets like a day.
Okay.
And you do have Christmas, and you have Boxer Day afterwards. You do have that, but you have Buddha's birthday, and you have other things of that nature.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so I find it to be, I found the attitude of the people to be more inclusive in terms of how they worked and operated, and they were very cognizant of that. They were very keyed on making sure that that was always the case.
Yeah. So now that leads me to this next question. So what should higher education institutions in the United States do to recruit a more diverse student population in hospitality and degree programs?
Well, going back to what you started with in terms of how we began and where my passion came for how we got together was, I had taught at Virginia Tech as a graduate, as a doctoral student. And at Virginia Tech, we had some Black students. We didn't have a lot of minorities, though, of any type there, based on the fact it's in Western Virginia, not West Virginia, Western Virginia, but we did draw from Washington, D.C. area. Then I got to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and there was a little bit more of a diversity, particularly from the Asian culture there, mostly international students in those days. But when I got to San Francisco State, what was just blatantly obvious to me was that certainly there was a large Asian population amongst our students, but I'm sitting across the bay from Oakland, and I have one Black student in class. And I'm saying, how can this possibly be? I can understand in some of the locations like Virginia and where it was in Virginia, to some extent, I would understand UNLV, but I didn't understand that in San Francisco. And I couldn't, so I wanted to find out how we got to the root of it, how we got to those students to influence them at the high school level where they're starting to make some decisions on what they're going to do and what might interest them in the process. And so I think one of that leads me to that answer to that question is that it has to come before you start recruiting for your program at the university level. It has to be some recognition, whether it's recognizing a chef who they admired, for some reason in the process that they had been exposed to, whether it's recognizing that hotels are public places, and these beautiful five-star luxury hotels around need to have management and need to have staff that run these, and these are not places that are off limits. I think most students actually, when they come to the university, don't necessarily understand that they can just walk into a hotel. They think it's like off limits. But particularly when it comes to someone of color, I think that they are more cognizant of that. People will wonder why they're there, what they're doing. And I think that there needs to be a recognition that they're a part of that too. And that this is a part of what they have an opportunity to be, to build a career on, and to be a customer as well of those institutions, whatever career that they build. And I think that's a key element that just wasn't, I haven't seen it there in university levels. It wasn't, there was affirmative action and other things that are important elements to bringing in students of color in all different areas, no matter where they came from and what their background is. There's Pell Grants to bring those students who don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal to go to a University of San Francisco, for example. And they're very good at that, but they don't necessarily integrate it into the various disciplines.
Yeah. Well, I remember having a conversation with Janet and some of the other board members, like, why aren't there any Black kids in this program? And they go, well, Kelly, this is San Francisco State and the students pick whatever class they want. And I'm like, but isn't it important to you that you don't have representation? I said, so what kind of recruitment efforts do you do? And there were none.
Yeah. Well,
none
one of the things that
place.
we did at San Francisco State, which is something that I learned back at my days as a graduate student at Virginia Tech, the organization existed there. And then I was involved in it just in watching the growth of it at UNLV, was the National Society of Minorities in Hospitality. And the elements of that at UNLV and at Virginia Tech were more of Black students involved, as not as much with the Asian students. But when I brought it to San Francisco State and then later to University of San Francisco, I helped launch it at both places as faculty advisor. my objective wasn't just to create opportunities for the other students of color, whether they be Asian or well, that was predominantly what they were, but also to be able to recruit in more African
Yes.
American students, more Hispanic students, and we had more Hispanic students, by the way, at USF than we had at other places, probably because there's some history behind that in terms of the mission of the Jesuits there, to
Okay. Yeah.
recruit from that aspect of things and recruit from the Catholic schools in the San Francisco and other areas where there's a higher population.
So now looking at that, so what do destinations need to do to attract more diverse groups of visitors?
Well, going back to what we were talking about earlier with regards to recognizing key recognition of dates and so on with regards to celebrations. I
Okay.
think that's an important element that gets missed. The being on the advisory board of the Pismo Beach Conference and Visitors Bureau, what I see here when we started to look at this issue was that there are things that they associate around 4th of July. There are things that they associate around Christmas and New Year's and things of that nature.
Okay.
But
Okay.
there's not a lot of recognition of other potential holidays. For example, if you went to a hotel in San Francisco this past week, every one of them would know that this is Chinese New Year. If
Okay.
you went to a hotel in Pismo Beach, I'd say very few of them know that. And so
Okay.
if you want to attract more, in this case, here, we don't have very much of an Asian population, and we don't have very much of an Asian market in terms of the guests who come here.
Okay.
So if you want to influence that, you need to be able to recognize that and go, wait a minute, this is a holiday period. Now, it's not a holiday from work for people in the US, but
Sure.
it is a family recognition. There are abilities. And the same thing would go, with the Black culture. What about family reunions? What about those kinds of things? What are
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
doing with regards to that? Now,
Yeah.
I have to say one of the things, and I was instrumental in being part of this, a couple of years ago when we started this, when I got on the board, was that they have a much more diverse group in their advertising aspect, and they've done a lot of work with the in San Francisco and in LA to get Black influencers who come here, promote their social media and so on, because this is a very attractive place.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of elements of all the kind of things that you'd want to come. And yet it tends to be from the valley, from the what do I want to say, the San Joaquin Valley, and mostly a white background in terms of the people who come here to visit. So
Yeah.
I think that there needs to be a recognition of what the draws are. People don't necessarily, when in my experience, I'm only speaking from my observations, but my wife is Chinese, so I can see some of that.
Okay.
You tend to go where other people like you go to. You don't want to be the one who stands out as the only one.
Right. Exactly. Well, you
And
know what?
so there
Now,
needs to
look,
be
now
that.
for Black folks, that's happened a lot,
I know, I
so
know, I know. Exactly. Well, for example, one of the things that we actually did was for the American Indian population, indigenous people. One of the things that we looked at is we went to the local Chumash tribe and we said, what are some of the key areas of this we need to know about the history here in terms of your culture and the indigenous people in the Chumash tribe? What are some of the significant places? We need to understand those to promote those. So we need to know what the history was.
yeah.
Is there places like that? Are there things that we should be able to be more aware of? And vice versa, things that we should be aware of that may be detrimental to that image.
Okay. Now, I think that is, the simple fact that you're on the board with the Pismo Beach and you're still working basically.
Well, I still have a role with that, but it's just an
Oh yeah.
advisory role.
Oh yeah, which is awesome. I think it's a great way. And then, to come up with that idea of destination spots, you guys need to start thinking about how to brand yourself better
Yeah.
in terms of using different holidays and occasions to draw people, which actually brings me to this question. Now, as a result of the COVID pandemic, what changes does the hospitality industry need to make in preparing for future leaders in the industry? Um, of success to the new next normal because, COVID has actually stopped a lot of traveling. So there's that people aren't really that eager about going anywhere. So what does the next normal look like? What is that going to be?
Well, I think there's actually there's a relationship here between both the diversity aspect and what's happening in the process of it. Pismo Beach, for example, is no different than a lot of other places in California. The staff that do the work, that the housekeepers and so on, tend to be Hispanic. So they're a different racial background than the people who come and stay there in the process of things. So
Okay.
when I think what happened is, if you look at a recent study that was just published, that 92% of hoteliers in the United States, hoteliers and restaurants in the United States, say that labor shortage is a critical issue to them right now.
Yes,
And part
yes.
of what's happened here, I think, my observation is that those people who were marginalized in terms of their role because of, in some cases, because of the racial background they came from, or let's say the economic background that they came from, in terms of what their role was in the hotel, they looked at this during the pandemic and they said, why am I going to work in these places where I'm paid low, where I'm not recognized, where the people
Yes.
who come here are not like me? I can get a job working someplace else. Walmart, I could get a job working at somewhere else where I work maybe less hours even and make more pay, or I am where people who are like me are also going and shopping and doing those kind of things. And I'm not scrubbing floors and tubs and all those kind of things, or I'm not cooking in a hot kitchen. I'm learning, I'm doing a different job. And I think as a result, a lot of people said, hey, when I looked at this, I don't need to do this anymore. My childcare aspect that I'm paying for, that I can barely pay the bills for because of the job that I've got, I can do something else, or I can stay home more with my kids and I can do something else in the process. So
Yeah.
I think the industry has had to wake up to this. And I think the challenge that's going to be faced in the future is that technology, or if you will, I believe the artificial intelligence or machine learning that we have that is growing in here will become a bigger and bigger factor in the hospitality industry. So some of those jobs are not necessarily going to be there because people don't want those jobs any longer, if you will. That's one of the reasons we have a shortage. So that means that we need to have a refocus to those people who are working there, to teach them and train them to do things differently. Now
Yeah.
they're not the person that's going in to clean the toilets. They have a machine that does that.
Yeah.
They're not the people who have to put all the details together in the kitchen, because that's being done in an automated aspect of things. And so now we have to manage the automation. So who's
Yeah.
going to manage the automation?
Yeah.
They are going to manage the automation. If you know how to do it from a manual standpoint, then from an automation standpoint, makes it easier. All you have to do in the history of the hotels is look back to when we went from front desk that had your boxes for the keys, and they went to an automated system. And the people who, when the automated system would go down, the only people who knew how to run the hotel were the people who used to work in the old system. Well,
Okay.
it's the same thing. When today we need to teach and train those who are doing the other jobs how to work the technology today to be more effective in the job that they're doing. And that's not an issue of taking jobs away. That's an issue of creating better jobs, higher paying jobs, and educating that workforce to a higher level of education. Here comes the vocational programs, the university programs, and so on, in terms of making that a path that maybe the housekeeper in a hotel doesn't see today. They don't see that as a path for them. I doubt that if you surveyed the housekeepers in San Francisco, that you would find very many of them who thought, oh, I'm going to go back and get a college degree and I'm going to work in the hospitality industry and that's going to take me to management.
Yeah.
But if you gave them the opportunity to say, well, maybe you should have some input on what's going on with how things are being done. And maybe you can be the one that helps create this and develop this. And that creates an interest, that sparks something in them that says, maybe I can do more than what I'm doing today. And maybe I can work towards a higher paying job or a bigger and maybe a management level position down the road. I think that's overlooked sometimes. I think we tend to think that management has to come from somewhere else.
Yeah. No, I think those are great ideas. And it's like, so I remember before I left the Prime and Prep program, Casey was talking to me about how they have they were playing with different robots that were going around doing different things in the in the hotels, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they're getting ready to automate. And
But
so,
that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. Artificial intelligence and, if you will, the Alexas and the Suris of the world, and the mechanical learning aspects we're talking about, the robotics and all that kind of stuff. Right now, we see those as kind of a novelty, although places like Singapore, they're investing a lot of money in that because Singapore has a huge labor problem too. You know, they've educated the population of Singapore to the point where none of them want to do those jobs anymore, and they
okay,
don't. And when they bring in people from overseas, that changes the mixture of the population. It's only 5
yeah,
million people in the whole country. So you bring
wow,
1 million people in to work on those other jobs, and now you're influencing the whole thing. So they've got to keep some limits on that. And so as a result, they've put a lot of money into that. And what they're doing is they're not taking away jobs, and they're creating new and different ways to do things. So it's not just the robot coming to your door. It's the whole process. It's everything looked
yeah.
at from beginning to end and how it's working, and more efficient, more effective. And the people that are running it are the people who used to do the job.
So IT basically is real. It's important that that becomes a program, just really teaching people how to run these things.
Yeah, yeah. It will have to be the way that hotels will finally. Hotels have been slow to develop in technology as a history, but they're finding now that they're being forced to do it, and restaurants as well, because they don't have the labor. They just don't have the
Yeah.
people to do it. So they're going to have to come up with new technology and ways to do it.
And you know what? I see the restaurant industry. I mean, so many places have closed,
Yes.
you know, and then some are opening right now, but it just makes you wonder, God, what is the future of this industry going to be?
Yeah. Well,
But
there's
it, I
always
mean,
been a
it,
place for the creativity. There's always going to be a place for innovation. There will always be a need for someone who is a chef who knows how to, create something more than just what a computer would be able to develop, even through artificial intelligence, to be able
Mhm.
to work with that and do that. And then the same thing is going to be true with the customer, because ultimately we're looking at the customer experience. And the
Yes.
customer experience is not going to say, I just want to go in and I want to use my Apple Pay, and I want to use my digital key, and I want to go in and I don't care if I see anybody and so on. Yeah, some people will want that.
Yeah.
And I for one happen to like to do things that way, but I also enjoy interacting with the staff. And what we need is people there who are at a different level. They're not there just routinely doing a task. They're actually there to help advance the experience for the guest.
Yeah.
So the person who checks you in at the front desk shouldn't be the lowest paid worker in the hotel. That is
Exactly.
that is the most important experience that you have, and yes, the lowest paid worker in the hotel. Why
Because
not
they,
put an assistant manager out there on that
yeah,
position?
yeah,
You
because
know,
they
and let
set the
technology do the
stage.
rest.
Well,
Yeah.
that first person you meet set the stage for what your whole experience is going to be like. I know that when I walk into Pandora, not Pandora, what's Panera, you know how they have where you can actually place your order on the computer. I
Hmm.
walk right past that and I go, I want a person. You
Yeah.
know, I'm so old school that I don't know if I can get ready for
Yeah.
all of that,
Yeah.
because that personal experience is like on the phone. You know, when you call to make an appointment or something, you get all this automation. It's like, you know what? Can I hit zero to get the operator? Can I talk to somebody for real? Instead of pushing all of these buttons, I'm just not ready
See,
for
I
this.
don't fit that mold, because even though I may be an old guy, I still love to use those technologies. You know, when McDonald's was pioneering in Singapore, the automated kiosk where you could make your own burger.
Okay.
I mean, if you used to go to the counter at McDonald's and you said, I want a McDonald's, I want a Big Mac, but I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want that, you would have to wait forever for that. Now
Right.
they came up with a system there where you went to the computer, you said, I want this on it, I want that on it, I want that on it, you went, boom, and then you walked up and you picked it up. It was really simple. You didn't
Well,
have to go through that explanation to somebody and hold this, or hold the mayo, whatever. You did it, and you got it on the computer, and it was done.
now, you know, and hearing you say that, now there are times when you're in a rush when I don't mind that.
Yeah.
But when I'm in a moment where I want to be chitty chatty and I want to, you know, reach out to people, I want real people. But
Well, yes.
you're right, the
There still needs
automation,
to be
you
there
know,
needs to be a person aspect related to it. So you
yes.
don't just put the kiosk in. You have to have people to manage the kiosk
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
customer experience. So
Yeah.
when you walk in, you see a person.
Yeah.
When you walk into a hotel lobby, you are greeted with a person. In Asia, for example, most hotels have guest relation officers, and guest relation officers are predominantly female, and they're usually dressed in whatever local, attire they may have. And they greet you there, and they take you to the desk or to your room, whatever the case may be when you arrive. Well, we
Okay.
need to have more of that kind of recognition. That
Yeah.
you don't have to stand in a long queue. We don't have to pull out your credit card, and your ID and all that kind of stuff. Everything is already there. When you walk into the hotel, you know where they know who you are, whether it's facial recognition, whatever things may be in the future, and you are then greeted by someone who says, Dr. Jones, welcome, glad to have you back. I know you've been here 4 or 5 times before, all those kind of things that make you feel like you are now having an experience, as
Yes.
opposed to just another transaction where you walk in the door, you go to the front desk, you have a person who's, paid the lowest paid person in the hotel. And even though they may be trying to do a good job in what they're doing, they're not being paid to interact with you. They're being
Yeah.
paid to process the transaction.
Yeah. Ooh, child, I'm not, honey. People got to get ready because this is a brand new world, isn't it?
It is.
It is a
Well,
brand new world.
I think COVID will actually lead to a stronger experience in the hotel experience in particular. I think it
Okay.
probably will do that in the restaurants too, but I'm not as certain about that right now. The restaurants are still, a bit.
Well,
They're
you know
still
what? If they
traditional.
had you as a consultant kind of guiding them, showing them the way, because realistically, and I think this is going to be an important podcast because we'll get to share it, especially to the hotel industry and to the restaurants that I know of, to open up their eyes, to let them know they got to get ready. You got to
Yeah.
get ready or you're going to get left behind. And it's
Well,
not just the hotel and the restaurant, it's all of us. We
yeah,
all have to think of a new way of being
yeah,
because the world is changing, it's growing fast. And if you don't have your thinking cap on, oh my to goodness, you're going to
yeah,
get left behind.
yeah, yeah.
Because just think about it. A lot of people are being able to work from home. I was actually teaching online before we had to teach online because of COVID. So I didn't have a problem with setting up some of my other classes that weren't online. I
Yeah.
got them up
I was the
quick.
same way. I was
You
the same
see?
way. If I had actually been teaching at Cal Poly when that happened, it would have taken me maybe about 2-3 days to change over from what I was doing to do it, because I already did. And then I did teach a course online for a Philippine university, shortly after that. It was very easy for me to just transition to that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And so it was like, oh, okay. So I can actually teach classes after I stop working with City College. I don't know if I'll do that, but I just know that a lot of people are not interested in going back, doing that commute, getting on the BART. So people are working from home now.
Yeah,
So if you got a set of skills that allow you to do that, why not do it?
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So like I said, I'm excited for the future personally. I just know I remember when we first got computers. I remember my husband's a computer systems analyst. I remember when I asked
Oh.
him, I said, "How do you turn it on?" He just looked at me like, "Really? You're going to ask me how do you?"
But you
And
know
he
how to
goes,
do it now.
exactly. But we were afraid at first, you know,
Yeah.
but you just have to embrace it slowly but surely. And they have all kinds of classes and things out there. But I'm wondering, so how can the future leaders better prepare themselves for this new future?
Well, today, if I was teaching actively at a university in the US or back in Asia, wherever it would be, one of the things that I would be keyed on with the regards to the expectation of those future leaders is when they come out and graduate and start their careers, they are not going to be looking at the same industry as before.
Mm,
It's not going to be a large workforce that they have to manage. It's going to be a smaller workforce. There's going to be opportunities there where they're going to have to do some of the actual jobs that maybe used to be done by one of the associates that they had hired there, because there's not enough staff to do it. So they're going to need to do that. And as a result of it, they need to be able to understand how to take their knowledge that they've learned, especially from innovation, to be able to make that job easier so that they can do their management level career job more effectively.
okay.
And so if there isn't incorporated within the curriculum, and we did this in Singapore, was a key element there, a course that focuses on the innovation aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I really credit the country of Singapore for enforcing that through their education system, so that we were directed to do that when we were building the program, which we wanted to do anyway, but we were directed to do that. They need to be able to think about how to bring the minds together to innovate and be more effective at it, so that they can do a better job in their management role. Because otherwise they're going to be doing the front desk. So let's take the front desk, for example. If you haven't been able to figure out how to make the process of a check-in or a checkout more effective in an innovative way for that guest, you're going to be the one sitting there at the front desk checking them in and checking them out. Because there's not going to be a front desk person paid minimum wage any longer. That job isn't going to exist at the same level. You need somebody who has more customer aspect. And if you want somebody who has more customer aspect, you have to get them away from the routine aspects of the job. And so therefore they have to be able to create more. So during the time they're going through their education process, they need to be able to explore all these other areas from other fields other than the hospitality field. They need to interact with people that are in the IT disciplines. They need to understand what kind of technology can be done. They need to be able to be appropriately use AI and mechanical learning and so on in the process of things that they do in their job. So when they get out there in the field and they actually start doing it, they can incorporate that, and they need to have a management who's willing and able to give them the free rein to do it. We've always talked about empowering the employee with the guest. Well, we have to empower the employee with the guest and with how they deliver the service to the guest. We have to empower them on both areas.
Wow. Now, so are there any programs here in the States or hotels that are doing this kind of training right now that you know of?
Well, certainly the major hotel companies have their labs where they develop new technology for guest rooms and other things in the process. But I'm not sure that they're incorporating all the elements of it. They do a lot of research these days, and academics has influenced this to some extent on the customer and what the customer wants. And you see a lot of data on that. But the experience from the employee standpoint may not be looked at quite as strongly as to what their input is in terms of that. It's one thing to ask the customer what their expectation is about a digital key, for example. Okay. It's another thing to ask the employee about the digital key, because just because I have a digital key on my phone doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work in the hotel. For example, I stayed in a hotel in Oakland a while back that had a digital key, and I like that aspect. But the separate building that room was in didn't have a digital key to get into the building. So you still had to use your room key to get into the building in order to use your digital key. So, if you're working in a hotel like that, you're going to try and work with management to figure out, and you're going to be part of management and part of that decision with your general manager and so on. How do we get around those kind of things? What do we do to make that work so that it's a seamless aspect? Because it doesn't make sense right now. Why do you have a digital key if you can't even get into the building with the digital key?
Right, you need that consistency. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Well, you have left me with a whole bunch to think about, which I think is so awesome, because I've been out of the industry for like 3 years now. And so
It's a different industry.
Hearing where it's going, it's like, wow, it's pretty exciting. So, but I'm embarking on the music industry right now. I'm getting ready to get back into the music industry.
Well, that's an exciting field too.
It is. I was in it before, but I didn't get to do what I had wanted to do. So now I'm going to get back in it and complete what I had started. Like I said, I was taking care of these babies, making sure they got their stuff together. Now it's my turn. So I would like to segue out of this now and get ready to ask you a little bit more about you. So tell me, who are 3 people that have inspired you?
3 people inspired me. Well, I have to say, I go back to when I teach, and particularly I teach an intro class, I always talk about admired leaders and admired leaders that influence you. And one of those admired leaders that I got to know one-on-one during my time of opening the Marriott World Center in Orlando was Bill Marriott. Okay. And what I got from him in particular was a passion and a love for the business that he didn't necessarily have to have, but he did. He got down hands-on. When he would show up at a hotel, Like when he showed it up at our hotel in Marriott World Center, and he would drive in that front entrance, he would say, it needs more flowers over here, it needs more plants over here,
Oh, beautiful.
and he's the one responsible. If you ever go to the Marriott World Center in Orlando and you see the pool area and how it was built, he set the construction process of that pool back 3 months after the hotel opened before it was finished, because he came down there, stayed at the Grand Hyatt. His son, who was 12 at the time, who's now on the board of Marriott, loved the slides and all the things they had in the pool there. And he came over with me. We walked through the thing and he said, I want to change this, want to change that. And he went back to all their design people and changed the whole pool area. So I have a lot of, he was one who I had a lot of admiration for. And the other at the highest level that I'm talking about was Robert Kwok, who was is still the chairman of Shangri-La Hotels, who I worked for in Asia in my first stint back there in 1990. Well, I worked for them for 5 years, but I worked for them in Hong Kong for 91, 92, and before that running the LA office. He was a guy who didn't take whatever anybody said to him as being this you can't do. He took it as, I think this is a challenge. And one of the greatest examples of that is if you knew Hong Kong at all, you'd say, well, when he first developed the Kowloon Shangri-La on Kowloon side, everybody said that will never work. That's not the area where hotels are, and that's where hotels are today. And
Okay.
he was an idealist, and he understood. He had a visionary. But both of those two were visionaries, I should say. They were visionaries. And if you get down to the nitty gritty, for me, the third person I would put on there, who really taught me the hotel business, but he didn't just teach me the hotel business. He taught me how you manage people in the hotel business, was a guy named Bud Davis. And he was my first general manager at the Chicago Marriott. And then he was my regional vice president when I was opening the Marriott World Center in Orlando. And he has since passed, but he was a great influence. He came up the hard way. He was working, he was from Chicago. He was in the minor league baseball system of the Cubs. He didn't have the college education. He was working on the floor at the Hilton, the Conrad Hilton Hotel, and he was one of the guys. And he built himself up to a vice president of Marriott Hotels in the process. And I have tremendous admiration for him and great talent for being able to manage people of all different types and personalities. So I would say those are the three people that influenced me the most.
Wow, that was incredible. So when you talked about Robert Kwok that built the Shangri-La Hotel, you know what it made me think of? Automatically, my mind went to Bugsy Siegel, how he developed Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Well,
just
yeah.
yeah, that same
Now,
kind
all those examples were from the industry.
Okay.
From an academic standpoint, I would say the dean at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, School of Hotel and Tourism Management, Kate Chung, who I have known well for many years. We both got our PhDs at Virginia Tech. He was a little bit before me. He's a guy who had great vision as well, and he was a guy who gave people who worked for him the opportunity to shine. And I always have a tremendous amount of respect for him as well. He taught me a lot.
Okay. All right. Well, I know that you could probably continue and tell me more.
Yes.
Now, tell me, what would the little 9-year-old David say to the grown man David now? What would he say to you?
Don't be afraid to try different things, to be able to change your mind, to explore, be curious. I think the thing, when you were going through my background and you see the various things that I did in my career, most of those things in the change were because I had a curiosity and interest to do something different. That's how I ended up in Asia. I didn't know anything about Asia when I went to work for an Asian hotel company,
Okay.
and not be afraid to make those changes. I think sometimes people feel once they get into a career path and what they're doing, that's the only path they can be in. And I have a former student from San Francisco State, Japanese woman who's in Japan today, but has had great success both in the US and in Hong Kong in her career along the way. She's leaving the hotel industry to do something different with a company in mechanical learning. And
Ah,
I said
okay.
to her, I admire that. I think that's the growth. I think that's where it's there. Don't get yourself so trapped into thinking, well, I don't know anything about that, so I can't do it. I think that you of all people who I'm talking to should know this well. With all the things that you've done in your career, you're a great example of somebody who's done just those kind of things. And you have the perseverance and the ability to know that you can do it and you can try it and take the chances, make it work.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely out there. I just can't even imagine just doing one thing and that's it. That's just
Yeah.
not who I am. Couldn't do it. Well, now tell me this. How are you spending your time in retirement other than, like you said, being on the advisory board uh, in that beautiful Pismo Beach? What else are you doing?
Well, today I'm enjoying living in the paradise that I live in. I do a lot of walking. I do at least 5 miles of walking every day.
Oh,
I walk out there with my dog, my wife. We go out. We enjoy that aspect of it. I keep up with the industry. Certainly, the involvement with the Conference and Visitors Bureau Board uh, has been stimulating from that standpoint. I like trying and still exploring new things.
okay.
And I'm still open to all those kind of things. And who knows what's next?
Yeah.
I know what I know what I like. I know what I've enjoyed, and I want to continue to do those things. But I want to do them with the passion that I had in terms of what I was just describing to you about what the future is. And I'm not sure that that's exactly where the industry is today. So, if I can find a way to make that happen and work together, then that might be something I do more of. But
Yeah, I know you're not finished yet. I can tell that you still have your ears to the, what is it? Ears to the door or ears
yeah,
to the
yeah,
ground?
yeah.
It's ears to
Well,
somewhere.
volunteer work before COVID happened. I was working at the local food bank here. We were volunteering at the Woods Humane Society. We ended up adopting a dog right after that as a result of that. But those have been kind of off limits during COVID. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
look forward to doing that and doing more that I have a passion for.
yeah,
And I would say that today one of the issues, and certainly in this part of the country here, has to do with the DECA students. Those students that are here, that are undocumented, and how they are allowed to succeed into the future. And anything I can do to work and help in that area would certainly be an area that I would have a real passion for.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're still definitely involved with making sure minorities are being seen and heard. Good for you. So is there anything you want to say to the listening audience before we close the program?
Well, I would just say that if if there is a person who I have had an opportunity to know in my career over a period of time who exemplifies the aspect of following your passion and doing what's there, it's you. And to be able to be interviewed in your podcast is quite an honor. I think that anyone out there listening to this, if you think of what Kelly's done, if you look at the kind of things that I've tried to do in my career, those are the things that I hope that when you look back and like I do now in retirement on, you say, I feel a great deal of satisfaction for what I've done in my career, but it's not over. It's not over.
Yes. Oh,
Maybe what I
absolutely.
was doing is not what I'm going to be doing in the future, but I still have a passion for it. And, we'll find the niche, whatever it is.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. And thank you. So, listening audience, I want to thank you for listening to Straight Talking with Kelly, where real conversations happen. This was a real conversation, wasn't it? So, I would like for you to find me on my YouTube channel, Straight Talking with Kelly, like it, subscribe, and please share it. Comment, and see you next time. So, Dr. Jones, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this. It's just been
Thank you,
such a
Kelly.
pleasure having you and seeing you again. And we're connected on Facebook, so I'll see you there.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.